McAlpine on Robert Burns and the Scottish economy. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put. Can I ask those members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now? And I call on Joan McAlpine to open the debate. Ms McAlpine, please.
Thank you. It is now 2 years since I led a debate on Robert Burns and the Scottish economy, which many members here contributed to. The motion at that time said we needed more information about the value of Burns to our economy at regional, national and international level. Following that 2018 debate and the publicity it generated, the Government's Economic Division funded research by the University of Glasgow's Centre for Robert Burns Studies. The report, Robert Burns and the Scottish Economy, by Professor Murray Pittock, with additional research by Dr Joel Ambrosine, is a substantive piece of work which was launched at the Birthplace Museum earlier this month. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome Professor Pittock and his colleagues from the university to the gallery today, and I'd also like to thank all the MSPs who signed the motion and who are speaking in the debate. The report found that Burns generated $203 million annually for the Scottish economy. In addition, Burns, the brand, enhances our standing in the world to the value of $139.5 million. The Anhalt GfK Roper Brands Index, which ranks the reputation of countries, puts Scotland in 15th place out of 50. Scotland is strongly associated with Burns, who in turn is strongly associated with values such as humanitarianism, egalitarianism, creativity and quality. The soft power of the poet globally cannot be underestimated. The report says that the last 15 years have seen a more coordinated approach to Burns tourism. The best example is the £23 million Robert Burns Birthplace Museum, which has transformed the visitor experience without compromising on scholarship. The Alloway attraction is second only to Shakespeare's birthplace among UK writers' museums in visitor numbers. The report points out that cultural tourists stay longer and spend more money than tourists as a whole. And it also notes that historic sites enhance the attractiveness of communities not just for tourists, but for residents as well. They can improve property prices and boost well-being and community pride. So investment in cultural and heritage tourist sites can enhance the built environment for everyone. So we need to ensure that our attractions are well known and marketed. The Birthplace Museum in Alloway, with 266,000 visitors, is second after the John Muir Country Park in visitor numbers to attractions associated with a single individual. The Robert Burns Centre in Dumfries also makes the top 10. But visitors to other places associated with Burns remain too low. His home in Dumfries, the monument in Kilmarnock, Suitor Johnny's cottage in Kirkoswald, Ellisland Farm outside Dumfries and the Bachelors Club in Tarbolton are wonderful, unique destinations which could, if promoted well, bring many more benefits to their communities and the Scottish economy. Tourism as a sector now accounts for 5% of Scotland's GDP and 8% of employment, with 207,000 jobs. Burns-related tourism brings in just under 155 million, almost two-thirds of which, 121 million, goes to Ayrshire and Arran. This is significantly ahead of the 21 million generated in Dumfries and Galloway, where Burns lived and died. So there's huge potential to improve the fantastic offering, not to improve the fantastic offering, it's already there, but to promote the fantastic offering, perhaps with better marketing and linking sites across geographical areas. Burns festivals throughout Scotland have an estimated value of 7 million. The Scottish Government's Winter Festival programme has been enormously beneficial here, and I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome the annual Big Burns Supper in Dumfries and Galloway, which is part of the Winter Festivals programme and which opens this Friday. Across Scotland, Burns Night has a turnover of £11 million. Professor Pittock points out that the success of the haggis industry is inseparable from the popularity of the brand. Burns-related food and drink is estimated to be worth 20 million, and better linking cultural tourism with the branding of produce is one of the report's key recommendations. A good example of this is already being done with the Grace, a celebration ale by South Brewery in Galloway. It's named after the famous Selkirk Grace, written the Selkirk Arms in Kirkcudbright and recited millions of times every January since then. That's one example we can learn from, but there's so much more we can do. The report points out that as a brand, Mozart has been valued at £3.5 billion to Austria, way ahead of our Burns effect. It says that there are in Vienna alone around 300 product lines associated with the composer, everything from sweeties to toiletries. The report recommends a number of measures to promote burns more effectively in Scotland. Renaming Prestwick the Robert Burns International Airport is a key recommendation. It also proposes greater alignment between food, produce and cultural tourism, including Burns tourism, in Ayrshire and Arran and Dumfries and Galloway regional tourism strategies. The report recommends improved signage on the M74, better infrastructure and connectivity and more joint marketing of Burns attractions. The report says the Government's new South of Scotland Enterprise Agency, which opens its doors in April, can help here, as well as the regional inclusive growth deals. And I know it's very much on the radar of the chairman of the new Enterprise Agency, who I was discussing the report with just last week. And of course, the report highlights the many successes too, including the work of David Thompson and Teresa Church, owners of Annandale Distillery and the Globe Inn in Dumfries. The distillery, magnificently rebuilt after almost a century, is already a major visitor attraction in the town of Annan. One of their malt whiskies, Man o' Word, is named for Burns, as is their young spirit rascally liquor. The Globe Inn, where Burns romanced the barmaid Anna Park, has been sensitively restored by David and Teresa as a fine dining restaurant, while maintaining the famous snug bar where Burns drank. This will help the curation and protection of those rooms associated with him, including the famous Poet's Chair. Entrepreneurs such as these and cultural leaders are vitally important in Scotland's rural areas. And what David and Teresa have done is really exciting. And there's more happening. Ellisland Farm, Burns' first marital home with Jean Armour, has enormous potential to bring more visitors to Nithsdale, and plans are already afoot thanks to Heritage Lottery development money. Of course, it's not all about money. The report emphasises the role of education and recommends improvements to the teaching of Burns in the school curriculum, helped by the Robert Burns World Federation, so that future generations can proudly and knowledgeably promote him. University research and education on the bard is also vital and was estimated to already bring in £500,000 a year. Glasgow University's Centre for Robert Burns Studies, who carried out the report, is important here. In my view, it shines intellectual light not just on the work of the poet, but on the literary, social and political context in which he worked in the 18th century in Scotland. And the report points out that images from that time also contribute to Scotland's brand value in the world. There's no contradiction between honouring Burns as an artist and recognising his commercial worth. Mozart is no less a great musician for having marzipan-coated chocolates named after him, which apparently sell in hundreds of thousands in Salzburg. Burns was a genius, just like Amadeus. His value is first and foremost as a cultural icon, but as well as enriching our culture, he can also enrich the people and places who inspired him. As a humanitarian who knew the pain of poverty, Burns would surely toast to that on his birthday on the 25th of January. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now call Willie Coffey to be followed by Oliver Mundell. Mr Coffey, please.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer, and congratulations, of course, to Joan McAlpin once again for bringing us our annual Burns Members' Debate in the Scottish Parliament. A fitting debate once again to honour and celebrate Burns and his continuing contribution to the social and economic well-being of Scotland. I think I've spoken in the previous Burns debates, Presiding Officer, and it's always a pleasure to do so. The economic impact that Joan mentioned in her speech of £203 million in direct impact throughout Scotland and a further £140 million in brand value may well be the tip of the iceberg, since the vast array of Burns' material in his songs and poems seems to find its way into a huge variety of settings in everyday life, from the obvious tourism route to other areas like education, creative arts, even philosophy, justice, business and farming, of course. He even appears on the tail fin of Norwegian Airlines aircraft. And the internationalisation of his works and his brand seems to go from strength to strength. You name it, Burns had something to say about him. The Glasgow University report that Joan mentioned is an absolute goldmine, of course, for Burns enthusiasts, but also for policymakers, for local authorities and local businesses. It points us towards new opportunities in making Burns' legacy more relevant in the modern economy of today. I particularly like the tie-in to the Ayrshire Growth Deal and Prestwick Airport and how we might capitalise on those further. The estimated economic impact in Ayrshire at £121 million is already substantial enough, but further possibilities are surely there for the taking when we embed Burns within some of the strategies we are deploying. Naming the airport at Prestwick as Robert Burns International Airport, supported, I think, by all of the currently serving Ayrshire MSPs, including our dear friend and colleague John Scott, would be a magnificent step forward in the marketing and promotion of Ayrshire as a first-choice destination for people coming to Scotland. Perhaps, inevitably, Presiding Officer, Brexit rears its ugly head, even in a Robert Burns context, with the Glasgow University report warning that we can expect a decline in the numbers of EU residents working within the tourism sector and the consequent impact that will have on our economy. Was Burns thinking about Brexit in his wonderful piece To a Moose, published, of course, in the Kilmarnock edition in 1786, when he said, "A backward cast my eye in prospects drear, and forward, though I cannae see, I guess in fear." Prophetic comments, perhaps, but enough politicking in this debate. I'd like also to mention, I think, at the very generous donation of $225,000 made by Mr. Frank and Mrs. Susan Shaw of Atlanta, USA, to the University Centre for Burns Studies. Mr. Shaw has Scottish origins, and this wonderful gesture will allow the university to carry out further work in relation to Burns and his potential. Locally, I can't let an opportunity pass, Presiding Officer, without mentioning our own wonderful Robert Burns Monument Centre in Kilmarnock, which offers a variety of services from family genealogy to wedding services. A beautiful location with wonderful and knowledgeable staff. Also home to the World Federation, which I pass by almost every other day. I hope that when Ayrshire's wider community of interest takes in the university report, that we do see some new thinking in Burns and new ways to exploit his genius. We can't really afford not to. Perhaps a shop and visitor centre in Kilmarnock Town Centre, printing copies of the world-famous Kilmarnock edition, with perhaps a connection to whisky, which, of course, Kilmarnock gave the world in the form of Johnny Walker 200 years ago this very year. One can only dream. And a quick plug, I think, for the Burns on the Beach free event in Ayr this Friday night with a unique experience of light, sound and music, not to be missed, I think. Presiding Officer, Robert Burns' legacy is substantial, it's growing and has huge potential to make an increasing contribution to the Scottish economy. We owe it to his memory to keep his name and his works alive, and we owe it too to our communities across Scotland to make the best out of a golden heritage of his wonderful works. We will be the beneficiaries if we get this right, and I would like to thank Joan McAlpin once again for bringing Burns to the attention of the Chamber tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I call Oliver Mundell to be followed by Colin Smith. Mr Mundell, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I begin by also congratulating Joan McAlpine on securing this debate, but not only on securing the debate, but also in the key role she played in getting this report written, and the publicity that it's got is very welcome, I think, from many right across the south of Scotland and the areas in which Burns was active. And I think, as is demonstrated from the motion and from the speeches we've already heard, I think it's got potential for the whole country. I'd also like to join colleagues in thanking Professor Pittock and his colleagues for the work that's obviously gone into this. Some of the suggestions seem at first sight to be simple, but I think then that asks a question of all of us as to why these things are not happening already. And I think it's good to have a substantive evidence base to go to the various bodies involved in making these decisions to passionately advocate for improving the place that Burns has within modern Scotland. I think it is interesting to look at the tension between celebrating his artistic and cultural contribution and looking at the finance, but I can't help but feel from my own knowledge and understanding of Burns that he wouldn't have had any problem at all with looking at the economic benefits of his work. I think he'd just be sad that much of this money has not made its way into his own pocket, but that's probably for another day. What I think is very positive is to see some of the events that have already been highlighted locally in my own Dumfriesshire constituency The Big Burns Supper is such a key fixture now. I think it's hard for many people to remember the time when it didn't exist, and it brings so much culture to Dumfries, bringing artists together, bringing performances to the town that wouldn't otherwise be there. And there's no doubt that the Burns branding has helped it cement its place as not just a local institution, but to gain a national profile. And the same too when it comes to the work at Annandale Distillery. It's no coincidence that they chose Robert Burns to be the face of one of their two principal malts, the other being named after Robert the Bruce. And I think that tells you something very significant, that businesses that are investing millions of pounds into the region recognise that Burns is a key selling point. And I think we've got a lot of catching up to do in terms of public policy, in terms of how we spend public money. And I hope that the South of Scotland Enterprise Partnership will look at the work that these innovative businesses are already doing. And I think other members are right already to have made the point that we need to join up the different attractions. We've got the excellent centre in Ayrshire, but I think it is about getting people to see Burns as a trail through the south of Scotland, to follow the route of his life, and to visit all these wonderful attractions. And I think if we do that, there's real potential to increase the value of Burns and to make sure that we're here in the future. I've spoken now in a number of these debates, and I always have ended with the sort of same bit of poetry, but I still think it's very good. And I think it does highlight that it's not all about money, but money is important when it comes to the economy and to local people. But it's a little section from Epistle to Davy, a brother poet. It's no in title, nor in rank, it's no in wealth, like London Bank, to purchase peace and rest. It's no in making muckle mare, it's no in books, it's no in lear, to make us truly blessed. If happiness hae not her seat and centre in the breast, we may be wise or rich or great, but never can be blessed. And I think, Presiding Officer, as I close, I think it is important to remember that Burns is very much in our heart as a country, but as we've said today, it doesn't stop us taking the financial advantage of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Mundell. I call Colin Smith to be followed by Kenneth Gibson. Mr Smith, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank you to Joe McAlpine for securing tonight's important debate. Like a number of members, I'm sure, this week I'll be making speeches about Burns' rich contribution to our cultural heritage at the many Burns suppers held across Scotland. But I think, as Joe McAlpine's excellent motion rightly highlights, it's important that we also recognise the economic contribution of Burns' legacy, and in many ways its untapped potential. Like Joe McAlpine, I have the privilege of representing the south of Scotland, where our national bard spent much of his life and penned his finest work. But before I was elected to this Parliament, I also had the honour of representing Nith Ward on Dumfries and Galloway Council. My ward included Burns House on Stinking Vennel in Dumfries. Fortunately, the streets had a name change since Burns' time, as well as St Michael's Kirk, where Burns was laid to rest when he died in 1796 at the young age of 37. I remember a visit to a primary school in the ward when the pupils were asked, "What's Dumfries famous for?" And one wee lad answered as quick as a flash, "It's the death place of Rabbie Burns." Well, he was right, but I hope Dumfries is known for a bit more than that. There's certainly more to Dumfries when it comes to Burns than his final resting place. When I was a local councillor, I chaired the Economy Committee, and I remember in 2014 we launched the Burns Trail. I was pleased to see this week that you can still get a copy of the trail leaflet from the local Tourist Information Office. At the time of the launch, I had hoped it would be the start of a wider promotion and recognition of the breadth of the physical legacy of Burns' time on offer to visitors to the South West, in many ways in line with the wider trail proposed by the authors in the excellent Glasgow University report, Robert Burns and the Scottish Economy. The trail itself takes you across Dumfries and beyond, not just to Burns House and St Michael's Kirk. It also takes you to Scotland's oldest working theatre, the Dumfries Theatre Royal, where Burns was a frequent visitor, and to the Globe Inn, where he was an even more frequent visitor, one of the many Burns traditions I continue to follow avidly. There you can visit the upstairs bedroom Burns often slept in and see verses he etched onto the glass windows. The trail also visits the Robert Burns Centre in the town on the banks of the Nith, which tells the story of Burns' time in Dumfries as well as Burns' statue and the statue of his beloved and very tolerant wife, Jean Armour. If you go out of town, you can visit Ellisland Farm, built and farmed by Burns in 1788, and where he penned many famous verses, including, of course, Auld Lang Syne. And you can visit the Bro Well, renowned for its healing qualities, although in truth, bathing in the freezing waters probably did Burns more harm than good. Unfortunately, healthcare in Dumfries has improved markedly since. The University of Glasgow's research report highlights the worth of many of these attractions on the trail, but crucially, it also highlights the missed opportunities. It places the value of Burns, as Joe McAlpine mentioned, as a tourist brand in Dumfries and Galloway at £21 million, a sizeable sum, but that's just a sixth of the £121 million generated in Ayrshire and Arran. These figures show that while Burns does make a vital contribution to Dumfries and Galloway's economy, Dumfries can, as the report states, with some conviction be presented as a Burns town as much as Ayr. In particular, it highlights Ellisland Farm, the home Burns built to bring his family together for the first time. It's already well worth a visit. But the Ellisland Farm Trust have developed exciting plans to preserve Burns' legacy and transform Burns' home into a world-class visitor attraction. The report describes the proposals as potentially transformative and believes delivering them would alone do much to increase Burns' visitor concentration in the Dumfries area. I wholeheartedly agree. The potential is enormous, but it will need support to deliver. So I would strongly urge the Government to consider carefully the recommendations of this report, and in particular how it can get behind the plans for Ellisland to help deliver the full economic and cultural legacy of Scotland's national bard. In the meantime, in concluding, Presiding Officer, there's already much to see in Dumfriesshire when it comes to Burns. Starting this weekend, of course, has already been mentioned, by the Big Burns Supper Festival in Dumfries from the 24th of January to the 2nd of February. I'll be going along to many of the fantastic events, and I would strongly urge all members to join me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I call Kenneth Gibbs, to be followed by Rachel Hamilton. Ms Hamilton is the last speaker in the open debate.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I wish first to congratulate my colleague Joan McAlpine for securing this evening's debate, and secondly, apologise to the Chamber that I have to leave after my contribution, as I'm hosting a Life and Chemical Sciences Manufacturing Strategy Leadership Masterclass programme at 6 p.m. In Robert Burns, Scotland produced one of the world's greatest cultural and literary icons, with his works translated into every major language, and Auld Lang Syne being covered by the likes of Elvis Presley and Jimi Hendrix. It's no wonder we proudly celebrate Burns not only on the 25th of January, but all year round. It should also shock no one to learn that our national bard is worth over £203 million annually to Scotland, according to a report published on the 10th of January by the University of Glasgow, which assessed the cultural importance of Robert Burns and his contribution to the Scottish economy. Burns' brand has been enhanced by an ever-increasing global profile and better facilities for visitors in his native Ayrshire. Over the last 2 decades, Scotland has transformed the way we celebrate and recognise the poet. Today, there are more and more Burns-related festivals, as we heard from Joan McAlpine, such as Edinburgh's 2019 Burns and Beyond event, and products such as Annandale Distillery's Man o' Words whisky, and, in my own constituency, Arran Distillery's Robert Burns single malt, which have significantly improved Burns' cultural and economic value to Scotland. In 2009, the Robert Burns Birthplace Museum opened in Alloway and attracts up to 300,000 people annually, making it the second most visited writers' museum in the UK after Shakespeare's in Stratford-upon-Avon. And 2/3 of Burns-related tourism centres on Ayrshire, and its recent growth deal names Robert Burns on its first page. I'm sure most Scots have plans for Burns Night, and globally some 10 million people attend Burns suppers every year. Across Scotland, combined ticket sales, kilt hires, food, drink and so on bring in millions and sustain employment. I mean, who knew that a plate of haggis, neeps and tatties could so benefit our economy? In 2007, the University of Glasgow opened a centre for Robert Burns studies, with the largest concentration of Burns experts anywhere. Its mission is to develop research, scholarship and teaching of Burns and related literature, including the culture of the period in which he lived. Since 2010, the centre has worked on Editing Robert Burns for the 21st Century, a 15-year project funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, and by 2024, all his works will have been published in a multi-volume edition. The project so far has attracted research and development funding in excess of £4 million. Perhaps even more valuable is the community aspect. Through social media, those working on the project have reached out to the wider Burnsian community to gain more information and insight. Even in 2020, he continues to connect us. The university report is promising, but argues there is still much to be done to harness the Burns brand to drive economic growth for Scotland, recommending that the Scottish Government set up a Burns Humanitarian Ambassadors programme to award and recognise work here and abroad to support the values with which Scotland and Robert Burns are associated. and that Glasgow Prestwick Airport be named after the Bard, in line with others honouring local legends such as George Best, Belfast City Airport and Liverpool's John Lennon Airport. Presiding Officer, I submitted a motion calling for the renaming of Prestwick in May 2011, supported by 35 MSPs, including John McAlpine. I resubmitted a similar motion 7 years later, so such a name change is long overdue and it's one I clearly support. In short, Burns' legacy creates and sustains hundreds of jobs and delivers millions of pounds for Scotland's economy, and it's heartening to see more than 2 centuries after his death that Robert Burns' work is still being celebrated and revered today.
Thank you very much, Mr Gibson. And Mr Gibson did seek prior consent to leave as he's chairing a meeting and after the delayed decision time, that was necessary, just to make sure you understand. I call Rachel Hamilton, final speaker in the open debate, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As the only Welsh woman here in the Scottish Parliament this evening, and as we approach Burns Night, it's very fitting to celebrate the Bard in the Scottish Parliament, and I look forward to replying on behalf of the Lassies to Colin Smith tomorrow night. I want to first of all thank Joan McAlpine for bringing this important debate to the Chamber, and also to welcome Professor Pittock and his colleagues here this evening. My constituency of Ettrick, Roxburgh, Berwickshire can actually lay a claim to a piece of Burns' history, for it's been suggested that it was during a service at Duns Kirk that Burns garnered the idea for his famous poem To a Louse, but also drawing inspiration from the eponymous bug crawling from the hair of a well-coiffured lady sitting a few pews in front. And perhaps Joan McAlpine and I can fight over whether Jean Armour spent more time in hers or my constituency. But I'm sure many places across Scotland can lay a claim to a lot of Burns' inspiration for his work. But nonetheless, it's incredible that over the centuries, Burns remains Scotland's favourite poet with an immense global appeal for his work, continuing to grow and grow all these years later. And cultural heritage, as we know, has immense potential to bring tourists from all over the world and boost our economy. As Joan mentions, the legacy of Burns generates a whopping 200 million per annum for the economy, and the brand itself is worth 140 million. And I want to see Burns' legacy drive more tourism, especially in rural areas like my constituency and my colleague Oliver Mundell's constituency, where so much of his poetry and songs are rooted. Burns tourism offers a fantastic escape from the bustling frenzy of Edinburgh in peak season or the tours of various castles and distilleries. Countries around the world have invested heavily in celebrating their national cultural heritage, and as Joan mentions, take for example Austria. Austria has ploughed immense investment over the years into celebrating and promoting Mozart, and Salzburg dedicated 7 years and 7 million to preparing for the 250th anniversary of the birth of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. For the first time, the acclaimed Salzburger Festspiel staged all 22 of Mozart's operas during its 6-week run in the summer and throughout the year. And more than 500 projects, exhibitions and events were hosted across the country. And there is nothing stopping Scotland from doing the same with Burns, and indeed other iconic Scottish figures, perhaps linking literary giants such as Sir Walter Scott at Abbotsford and across to Alloway. There's nothing stopping us. It was interesting to note that Professor Pittock's analysis included the regional inclusive growth deals such as Borderlands and Ayrshire growth deals, and the importance that they play in promoting Robert Burns. I believe that a case could be made in the Borderlands deal to facilitate the expansion of Burns tourism, and in his recommendations he suggests that agencies such as the South of Scotland Enterprise Agency should pursue an integrated approach, and my colleagues have already mentioned that this evening, drawing on all aspects of the tourism industry to promote business-led inclusive job growth. The UK and Scottish growth deals offer large-scale projects the chance to secure funding, and I believe a business case must be put to the likes of SOSEP. And I was pleased that Joan McAlpine had mentioned this to Professor Russell Griggs last week. And we also must be feeding into the discussion of the Borderlands growth deal. We just can't miss an opportunity like this. I've mentioned Jo McAlpine a lot, but there are many words in the motion, and she spoke so eloquently tonight, but she's recognised the importance of highlighting Dumfries and Ayrshire along the main transport corridors, and the lack of tourist signage has been an issue on the M74 and the M6, with constituents contacting me, and I'm sure others, about their frustration that prominent tourist sites and routes are missing. We need to be showing off our countryside, especially that which Burns writes so eloquently about. Instead of tourists travelling up the M6 and the M74 without a clue of where they're going or where they could go, if anything comes out of this debate, I would like to call upon Transport Scotland to review the guidelines on general signage and brown signage if we are to seize the opportunities that tourism has to offer. And I know I've gone over my time, but thank you once again to Jo McAlpine, and hopefully we'll see a well-coordinated Burns tourist plan published soon. Thank you.
Very relaxed tonight about you going over your time. You must have noticed that. I now call on Ivor McKee to close, Minister for the Government.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Thank you to Joan McAlpine for bringing this debate here this evening, and thank you to all the members that have spoken so eloquently in memory of Robert Burns, our national bard and one of the most important cultural figures. And it's apt that the report from University of Glasgow is issued in Burns season, and it reminds us not only of the creative legacy of Burns, but also his enduring values, humanitarianism, love of nature and innovation, values which resonate with the identity of today's modern Scotland. We welcome this report, funded with £46,000 from the Scottish Government, and congratulate Professor Pittock on producing this work. The report highlights the significant contribution that the legacy of Robert Burns makes to our economy, over £200 million per year, and Professor Pittock estimates that tourism accounts for the majority of this, at £155 million. Burns festivals in Scotland contributing about £7 million, Burns Night itself £11 million, and spend on Burns-related food and drink, when Druthie Neighbours Meet contributes about £20 million. Professor Pittock also highlights the contribution of Burns to tourism, particularly in Ayrshire and the south of Scotland, and I welcome this and hope we can continue to increase the value that Burns brings, spreading these benefits throughout Scotland and throughout society through the inclusive economic growth strategy that's at the core of the Scottish Government's approach to grow the economy sustainably and to promote the well-being of everyone in society, something I'm sure Burns himself would have approved of, and our economic action plan sets out exactly how the Government plans to address this. And we know we can do this because we know our research, innovation and our creativity continue to be world-leading, with demand for Scottish products and services increasing across the globe. Professor Pittock says that we need to continue to leverage Burns for our international markets. And I agree. As Trade Minister, the importance of Robert Burns to Scotland, the brand, is particularly resonant. Our success, both historically and currently as a trading nation, is a matter not only of pride, but of course of economic necessity. Most recent figures show that our exports continue to grow, with exports of goods and services increased in the latest figures to £32.5 billion. And a major trading partner with exports of £15 billion, of course, is the EU, which, as Willie Coffey highlighted, puts Brexit at risk, the best-laid plans of mice and men. Despite this, we remain ambitious. Our export growth plan, a trading nation, sets a target of increasing international exports from 20% to 25% of GDP over the next 10 years. And it's estimated that achieving this target will increase GDP by £3.5 billion, support 17,500 jobs, and with an increased tax take of around £500 million per year. A trading nation, our plan for growing Scotland's exports highlights the importance of Scotland's cultural assets and cultural sectors in underpinning much of our export activity. And one of the key ways that the report notes that Burns' contribution to our economy is through culture, especially at this time of year. Our celebrations of Robert Burns marks the end of Scotland's winter festivals, the period from St Andrew's Day through Hogmanay and culminating in Burns Night here in Scotland and all over the world. The winter festivals are positively and purposefully entangled and entwined with boosting Scotland's international profile, enhancing our collective confidence and affirming and promoting our values of fairness, kindness, inclusivity and internationalism. There are Burns Night activities across our international network this month. A far afield is Beijing, Montreal, London, Dublin, Paris, Brussels and across the US, including a concert tour using the violin that Burns learned to play on. I myself will give an address to the Haggis at a World Trade Organization Burns Supper in Geneva later this month. We'll argue will they grace as Langsmire. Not got time to go through every point raised in the motion, and there are many covered in the report. But Scottish Government officials, indeed.
Oliver Mundell.
I thank the Minister for giving way. I just wonder, when he says he doesn't have time to address every single point, whether or not he had any specific reflection to make on the recommendation round Prestwick Airport being renamed.
Minister.
Indeed, and thank you very much to Oliver Mundell for that intervention. The trembling earth resounds his tread. And indeed, I shall pick up on many of the points, but also pick up at this particular point on the Prestwick Airport renaming issue. So you will be aware that is clearly Prestwick Airport is on a commercial basis, and that is a commercial decision that needs to be made by the operators of the airport, who operate at arm's length from the Scottish Government. So the point is well made, and many members have made that point, and I know, as Kenny Gibson made, it's been an issue that's been on the table for a while. But the position, of course, is that state aid and other rules mean that that is an issue for the operator of the airport to make decisions. Scottish Government officials have discussed the report at length with Professor Pittock, and we want to ensure that we pick up whatever learning we can from this, whether the response is for the Scottish Government, local authorities, our agencies, or the private sector whose business is linked to the life and works of our national bard. And there are some key points that I did want to pick up on. Professor Pittock acknowledges the potential of regional economic partnerships to drive greater inclusive economic growth, and we welcome this recognition and have supported their development across Scotland. Most of the country now is regional economic partnerships, bringing together local authorities, enterprise agencies, education and skills providers, the third sector and, crucially, the private sector to drive inclusive economic growth. Community wealth building is also mentioned. There is a community wealth building pilot in Ayrshire, Burns country, with £3 million of funding from the Scottish Government as part of the Ayrshire growth deal. Community wealth building seeks to drive more local value and jobs from large anchor institutions, public and private sector in the region. And not only might this utilise Burns-related produce, as the report suggests, but it is an approach that might well have met with his approval. The new South of Scotland agency is also referenced, and I'm pleased to say that officials are working towards the agency commencing work on the 1st of April as planned. And I look forward to the agency driving inclusive growth throughout the south of Scotland, including embedding a community wealth building approach. Amongst other recommendations or comments, there are some for local authorities and for regional partnerships, and we encourage them to consider this and to speak to our officials where we can offer assistance in delivering on the potential of Burns to local, regional and national economies. So in conclusion, I'd like to thank all the members for their contribution and Joan McAlpine for bringing this debate. And I'd like to reflect, and it's a great reflection on the continuing value of Robert Burns to Scotland. Burns' legacy helps support our economy, but his spirit and his values as a humanitarian and internationalist resonate still more. He might urge us, as he did to his friend in a letter of 1789, to dare to be honest and fear no labour. And at the opening of this Parliament, these words were sung, and they reflect our desire for a society as one where the barriers to participation and opportunity are removed, and where all of our people are treated fairly and have the opportunity to fill their potential. Then let us pray that come it may, as it come it will for all that sense and worth, or all the earth shall bear the gree, and all that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That concludes the debate, and I close this meeting of Parliament.